Okay, so this is Bible study for Matthew chapter 13, verses 53 through 58. And the text for today says, when Jesus had finished these parables, he moved on from there. Coming to his hometown, he began teaching the people in their synagogue, and they were amazed. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? They asked. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things? And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town and in his own home. And he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. So I know we've been taking a little bit longer text the last few weeks. This is a shorter text and pretty profound, I think, both as we apply it to Jesus and as we consider what his words might mean for us sometimes. So remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And number one says, what did we talk about in last week's study? A, parables, parables, and more parables. Yeah, so the last 2 weeks we have been in parables, the kingdom parables. The first week of the 2 week study, we were specifically in the parable of the weeds, really one parable, but then there was some quicker described or quick hitter parables that were shared in the last week's text. And B says the kingdom of heaven is like. So almost every single one of these parables began with the kingdom of heaven is like, and Jesus was describing to us the attributes of the kingdom of heaven, and he was describing the kingdom of heaven as something that we would be experiencing here on earth as opposed to something out there someday. And so he was talking about what the kingdom of heaven that is at hand, that is near, that is right here, looks like. So C, mustard seeds, treasures, pearls, weeds, fish, and nets, and some other stuff, I'm sure. So yeah, we had quite a few parables, and we went through each one of those to really make sure we understood the point of each one. Number two, what is happening now according to 13:53 through 54? A, Jesus finally, after I wrote that, I thought, I hope nobody thinks this is disrespectful. I'm not yawning at Jesus' teaching by any means. Um, but I do know that sometimes people yawn at my teaching. And so perhaps you thought that the repetitive nature of some of the questions where the answers were the same, it seemed like in every one, might have been tiring. So maybe you might be saying, finally, Pastor Pete's done talking about parables, and maybe not rolling your eyes perhaps at Jesus, because none of us would do that, obviously. Um, but Jesus has apparently finished his parables. Now, probably not all parables. There'll be more parables, but it said when Jesus had finished these parables, and it actually says that in the text. So um, whether he goes on to tell more parables or whatever, he's finished these parables. B, he moves on from there. That says it right in the text. B, C, he came to his hometown. It says it. D, he began teaching the people in his hometown in their synagogue. And that's all true and tells us right in the text. So that sort of sets the scene for what's happening now, and everything else that we hear in terms of their response is about that. Number three, how does 13:54 and 55 say they responded to his teaching? I'm sure very well. He was Jesus after all. A, they were amazed. Now it starts out sounding pretty good. They were amazed and they asked questions. They asked, Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? All that sounds positive. But then you start seeing it take a turn to where maybe their understanding or their attitude when they say that is not as positive as it sounds like it could be, because they begin saying, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't all his sisters with us? So they begin to describe the things they know about Jesus, which are ordinary things, which make him not, some great rabbi, not some, miracle worker or son of God, not some, we know his family. We've known him since he was a child, and honestly, he wasn't anything special. And in case you think that's disrespectful, it kind of tells us that, at least in the prophecies, I think in Isaiah, that there wasn't anything that should have drawn us to him. They ask, where then did this man get all these things? So they recognize that there's something that sounds like authority and there's miraculous powers, but they also recognize that they know where this guy came from and there was nothing special about him. So that's when they start sort of, instead of focusing on the God inspired and empowered things that are going on, they start focusing on how this person that we've known our whole lives now seems to think he's better than us, but we know better because we know who he is. Number 4, amazed is good, right? They loved him, right? How does 1357a say they responded to him? So it says, and they took offense at him. So when somebody who you know their background and they're not any better than you, in fact, you think you're better than them, starts doing things that seem amazing and, being like awesome, that's offensive, problematic. Like, I know this guy, like, it shifts our paradigm of where we sit in the social structure. I'll say it that way. So what I mean is, like, in my view of the social structure, and I'm, I don't think I'm alone in this sort of. We are born into sort of a self-centered attitude and way of thinking, and in our view of our friend group, we're the center. Maybe not, maybe not, but for a lot of people, when they think about their friends, they think about how their friends sort of organize around them. And we all think we're sort of at this place on the social structure. Now, some people may have, depression, anxiety, other struggles that make them, see themselves as less than what God has envisioned them to be, perhaps. But I think in a lot of cases, we think of ourselves pretty highly and we think of ourselves pretty central. So if I look at somebody that isn't anything special and I think I'm better than them, let's just be honest. I know you guys are like looking at me like, Pastor, you're not supposed to think you're better than people. Okay, I agree. But let's talk about what we really do, how we really think. Um, Now he's doing things that make it look like he's here. That's offensive to me. It's flipping everything upside down. It's flipping my understanding of my place in the social structure. Um, this, uh, so I'll lay it out this way. As much as we like to think that we've overcome this pride, it's a constant battle. It's something that we're constantly having to be aware of and look to Jesus for. And I can tell you this, that if we have a district training where we're going to train pastors in some skill or some, church planning training or something like that, um, if we invite all the pastors to the training and we show up with some like well thought of guru from Kansas City, then they're pumped, you know. Um, We got this such and such person, Dr. So and so from Nazarene Theological Seminary shows up. Pastors are pumped, they listen. Um, if we show up with two or three pastors, or staff members even from our church, you know, then there are people that are going to be like, okay, I know these people and I know what they've done, and so I don't know how much they offer to. Now we can be more qualified than whatever guru we bring in from Kansas City, but I guarantee people are less likely to listen. And I'm just going to throw it out that here's what'll happen: the Church of the Nazarene in New Mexico and El Paso area in our district has 4 or 5 pretty large, pretty successful churches and a bunch of small, struggling churches. And if I show up to teach a training, me, Pastor Pete from Sandia, um, and we advertise it, then the folks in some of the smaller churches are pumped, man. They know that we've done some stuff and they're excited to show up and learn. But I can tell you that the pastors of the 3 or 4 or 5 largest churches on the district won't show up because they don't think that I have anything to teach them. Now, I'm not accusing specific pastors. This is generalities. I'm not. These pastors are my friends. I'm not criticizing them. Some of them, it's been true uh, over multiple pastorates. I'm not even talking about one in particular person or whatever. But just in general, it's true that um, pastors of churches that are larger than mine don't necessarily show up because they don't necessarily think that I have something profound that they don't already know to teach them. And maybe they're right. I don't know. But I can say pastors that are desperate, that are struggling, that are pastoring small congregations think they've got to know something that I don't know because we're struggling and they're more interested in hearing. And I've been that person too, so I get it. Um, and I've been on both sides. So I'm not accusing particular people, but I am describing a situation that if we're all thinking, oh, no, I would never criticize somebody just because I know their background. You know, you're more spiritual than most pastors I know. Then you're doing better than most people. But the chances are that pride is still in you, and you still struggle to be taught by somebody that you know their background. And you don't think that they're worthy of teaching you, or you don't think they've done anything that proves that they have expertise to show you. That's exactly what's going on here with the people when they hear Jesus. What did Jesus say in response to 1357b? But Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown and in his own town and in his own home." Um, so I, my family is wonderful, and when I became a pastor, they asked me to pray for every holiday, and I kind of just said, no, that doesn't need to happen. I'm still like I really tried to downplay anything, but I have been invited in the last 20 years several times to preach at my home church, and they have really, in a lot of ways, welcomed me, respected me, been proud of me, felt like they had some sort of hand in my development and my growth and my coming to Christ and me being called and used by God. And so I really haven't had a problem with this um, as much as there's a lot of people that I know they have. Um, but it is also true that specifically when Jesus talks about a prophet, the prophet is the one that comes in and corrects things. And I think if I had to be the pastor of my home church and I started coming in and saying, no, we're not going to do things that way, that's not the right way to do things, I would have a different response. It's one thing to be a guest preacher, It's another thing to come in and say, no, we need to change how we're doing things. And I started correcting things. Well, we know you. So the good news is that I've had many years now of experience somewhere else. So all their memories of me are as a child and as a young person, not as an adult. And so I think they see that I've obviously grown up and changed since then. Um, so Jesus points out that a prophet is not without honor. In other words, a prophet is honored wherever they go, usually. But in their own town, they're not honored. There's a different way of looking at it that their own people have. What was the result of this? According to 1358, he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Because they were thinking of him not as somebody that was connected to God, not as somebody that had authority, but they were thinking of him as the person that he had been, that was not even worthy of honor. He was unable to do miracles in the way that he did when he went other places, when they put their faith in him as somebody that could help them. Number 7, I understand that in many ways you are not Jesus, and I'm not Jesus. However, if the Spirit and the power of God is with you, and if you need some updates on that, if you need some understanding of that, Romans 8:11, Philippians 3:20 and 21 are helpful. There has surely been a change in you. If the Spirit and power of God are in you, there's surely been a change in you. How have people who knew you before responded to that change? A, when I told them, they rolled their eyes and they are just waiting for this little phase to end. So, I found Jesus. My life has changed. Okay, sure. We've heard this before. You went to rehab. You did that. We've heard all that before. Um, we'll see. We'll see if there's a real change. So for a lot of us, that's what we've experienced. B, people are amazed at the change and they see and want to know what happened and seem to be interested in the same thing in their life. So sometimes the change is so dramatic that they have to believe it because you're so different. Um, and and they um, may roll their eyes at first, but after a little while, they may say, "Wow, I can't, I doubted, but you are really different." And that's a huge testimony. That's a huge witness. That can be very powerful. Um, when that's the response, and sometimes it is, but not always, and maybe not often. I don't know. And we could ask, is it because there's not been a major change in my life? That's a challenge. Um, but sometimes it's the way that people respond. See, they remind me of the sinful things that I've done that they saw me do. Maybe they did with me, and they tell me not to get all holier than thou. I had a friend from high school who moved to Albuquerque, and when he found out I was a pastor and I was preaching at an outreach event, he showed up because he said, I heard this, and I said, I had to see that. He showed up at church once. We had dinner with him once. He disappeared. I haven't seen him since. But, you know, I had some people say, oh, okay, you've changed, so you're so holy. Well, I saw you speeding on the highway, and they start trying to point out the things that I'm still doing wrong because I apparently think I'm holier than them. So that is a regular response that I've gotten and that many of us get. And that would be an example of the prophet being without honor. And I know maybe we don't consider all of ourselves prophets, and so we say, well, this doesn't really apply to me. But I'm not saying we all have perhaps the gift of prophecy, but a prophet is a truth teller. So when you go and you start talking about what the scripture says about who we should be, then you're telling people the truth that you have accepted, they have not perhaps accepted. And if that truth is that I need to live different and I need to have a transformed life, and the scripture says we all should, then immediately the response is, "Oh, you're so holier than thou." I get it. I get it. So, number 8, how should we respond in these situations? What's interesting is Jesus doesn't seem to have pushed it. It seems that the people's willingness to believe what God had done and what God was doing in and through him um, determined what they were able to get out of it. They weren't able to. He wasn't able to perform many miracles there because of that, because of their faith. It doesn't seem like he tried to prove it. He tried to show them. I'll just say this. Um, I've said this even among people who call themselves Christians. You can't talk your way out of a situation that you've lived your way into. So, in other words, you've shown them a lifetime of living like this. You're not going to be able to talk your way out of that. You're not going to be able to prove to them by your words that you're different. You're going to have to live your way out of it. In other words, you're going to have to live your testimony. And in the long run, if you stay faithful, then the eye rolling will stop. In the long run, if you show that you're truly changed, um, then the witness will shine through. Um, but some people may never accept it because they don't want the social structure, their place in the social structure, to change because of their own pride. And so I honestly think we don't need to argue. We don't need to try to prove ourselves. The proof is in the pudding. If you live the way God's called you to live and be who God's called you to be by His power, um, then that will yield any results that are even possible based on how they respond will come because of how you've lived. And that's what will yield the results. Not trying to argue and prove it. Um, you know, once you've lived a different way for as many years as you lived the old way, um, maybe the scales will start to tip. I don't know if it takes that long. Maybe it'll take longer, but that's the answer. Uh, and and God will show Himself true in and through you.